Welcome back to Engage in Truth. This is Steve Ford, your co-host, along with Pastor John Bornschein, Senior Pastor at Calvary Fellowship Fountain Valley, located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Thank you for joining us again today. We will continue our discussion today of Daniel chapter 5. Now, you'll remember, so far, we discovered where the idiom, the writing on the wall, came from. And I also would like you to remember that when we started our journey with Daniel, seemingly quite some time ago in chapter 1, he was only 14 years old. Well, now, 5 administrators later, and in chapter 5, Daniel is at least 80. I just wanted to give you some perspective about how much time has actually passed. So we'll continue our discussion of Daniel chapter 5 today. Remember that if you have missed any of these episodes that we've been talking about, you can find this series along with other prior episodes of this broadcast archived on the church's website at calvaryfountain.com. That's calvaryfountain.com. And here's Pastor John to get us started.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Ford. It is so good to be back with you, my friend. And Happy New Year to all of our listeners. Exactly. We know that you've probably maybe just at some point trying to catch your breath, that you came out of the holiday season and you hit the ground running. And here we are, 2026, and we're still talking about Daniel. Well, it's been that kind of study. We have really gone on a very methodical approach to the book of Daniel because we're trying to weave in any events that happen in real time as we see events that may even have some prophetic value to them. And we know how this works, that prophecy at times can take some time. There will be a catalyst, a sequence of events that follow, and then we at some point can look at that and go, that actually may have been a prophetic fulfillment, or maybe something that, like the sons of Issachar, we need to be mindful of, because we certainly live in a time that is, well, quite indicative of a prophetic nature. When we look into a third of the Bible and gives us a glimpse of what is to be expected before the return of Jesus Christ, our King, it is quite clear that we live in times that are often precarious, maybe cause a little consternation, a little anxiety. Sure. And the only way to remedy that is to go back to God's holy word, get a proper perspective, especially an end-time perspective. How are we, as the followers of Jesus Christ, to act when things seem out of control in the world? And he told us this would happen. So when it happens, here's how we're to handle it, and to actually be able to look up with joy on our faces, keeping our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith. And so as we go through Daniel, there are going to be moments where we're going to need to pause, assess some world events, and we know that eschatology revolves around Israel. So we keep our eyes on that and then tell you about it, talk about it. So right now we're going to go back to Daniel chapter 5, as Dr. Ford just mentioned there, and really give a little bit of a recap, because here, as you just said so eloquently, Dr. Ford, he was 14, now he's about 80. A lot of time's gone by in just 5 chapters.
Right.
And what we saw was the end of the reign of this King of Kings, as he might have called himself, right? The one we get the image of, this reigning authority who's the head of gold in this image, Nebuchadnezzar himself. He's the only king of the succession of kingdoms that begins with the name of a king. The rest are kingdoms. But Nebuchadnezzar is where this all began in the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And then we see rather quickly how that all unravels. Yeah. The end of Babylon has come. Now we have those who are fighting for the kingdom that are now under this new rule. And Nabonidus is technically the ruler at this time, but Belshazzar is number 2. Nabonidus has now gone into captivity, and Belshazzar sees something that he can't make sense of. And he is now looking desperately for someone to make sense of what he has beheld. We talked about the writing on the wall last time. And now he's promised some kind of a prime minister role, like number 3, to whoever can help him navigate this, because he's not technically the ruler. Nabonidus is. So in the midst of all this commotion, a queen emerges, and she declares the very words that Nebuchadnezzar had said almost 30 years before in Daniel chapter 4, verses 8 and 9 and 18. There's a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. Now, we talked about that. I want to be introduced like
exactly.
that. Right?
I was thinking the same
That should
thing.
be our epitaph, right?
Yeah.
We want people to think of us like that as followers of Jesus Christ, there's a man in your kingdom in whom the spirit of the holy God is with this man. That's what I want to hear from people, right? And we'll never know this side of heaven, honestly. And it's really not about us. Right. It's about who we represent. So then she uses every possible noun and descriptive adjective to tell Belshazzar that this is the most intelligent, gifted, capable man in all of the realm. Let's see what it says here, verse 13 of Daniel chapter 5. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah?" Well, Daniel stood apart from this Babylonian group, and when he was a teenager, and here now in his 80s, he is alone, and yet he is still faithful to God. So Belshazzar is young and inexperienced. He's probably about 36 years of age. But he knows of the Jewish captives and how they arrived in Babylon. He's familiar with the history. And he's also aware of Daniel and does not call him by the name that was given to him by Nebuchadnezzar. Here he's only called Daniel. So another thing to note is that Daniel was prime minister and held in high regard about 22 years before this. But here, after 5 administrations, the king has to ask who Daniel is. Okay, so it's amazing how fast things can change in just 20 years. So it appears that while he is still influential, the kingdom, now in disarray, is not leaning on the wisdom of Daniel as it had previously. In fact, Dr. Ford, we had talked about that while things were going on with Nebuchadnezzar under the judgment of God and having lost his mind, it's possible that the prime minister ruler at that time was even Daniel himself. Sure. So to move from a position of leadership over all of Neo-Babylon to now being forgotten but yet known of, all in a 20-year period of time. So we will read of other visions that were given to Daniel during the reign of Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 7 and 8. So it's, again, Daniel's not written in some chronological sequence as much as we would like. And prophecy has a tendency of doing that. We call them parenthetical interjections, in which Daniel was giving us the sequence by way of what is revealed prophetically, the miracles that occur, the visions that are revealed, and I lump that in the miracle category because it's something that humans can't understand nor do. We are totally dependent on God for even revelation of such. And so he gives us those sequences, and then he'll come back to this time and rule about Daniel chapter 7 and 8. So there'll be a little bit of a deviation, and then let's come back to that. Right. And so, Dr. Ford, if you could take us to verses 14 to 16. Let's see what happens next.
It says, "I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not give the interpretation of the thing. And I have heard of you, that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom." So we see Daniel, he's not intimidated by this whole deal, nor is he really interested in being 3rd ruler in the kingdom. He wants to be 3rd ruler in the kingdom that's got a few hours to last. After all, the higher up you go in rank, the more likely you are to get killed, right? So he wasn't intimidated by any of these monarchs when he was a teenager, and he's definitely not about to be intimidated when he's in his 80s.
That's right. Let's see what happens next here. Verse 17, it says, "Then Daniel answered and said before the king, 'Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation.'" Wow, you're right, Dr. Ford. He's pretty bold right about now. Bold. We were joking before the program of what I'm going to be like when I'm in my 90s because, quite frankly, as we look at the signs of the times in which we live, science, when it looks at the geomagnetic pole shift, as well as what we look to the 120 Jubilee cycles of the Bible, that we are in the final Jubilee, which means the final 50 years of that record of 6,000 years before a 1,000-year Sabbath. So it's not the end, but the beginning of Christ's rule on the earth at the 6,000th year mark, or right at that 7,000th year, the beginning of it, right? So we're going to have a 1,000-year Sabbath. And so when we look at this, we have to be very mindful of the fact that we are living in the end time, the time before the reign of Jesus Christ. So it's the end of the kingdoms of men and the beginning of the best kingdom that's ever been upon the earth before all things are made new. Right. So we should really not call it the end of days, but the beginning of awesome things to come, right? So we're right at the end of the foolishness of the era of men, and the beginning is fast approaching of the glorious kingdom of Jesus Christ. So like Daniel, we ought to be holding very loosely to the things of this world. We need to be laying up treasures in heaven, because as Peter says, all of this is going to be burned up. So what manner of people ought we to be, living knowing that we are trying to make the most of every breath that's been given to us? So seize the day for the glorious reign of Jesus Christ. Daniel has that kind of attitude, that here he is in his 80s, like, what can you possibly offer me? I mean, here Satan later on was trying to barter with Jesus and saying, worship me and I'll give you all these kingdoms. And it's like, what are you doing, Satan? Are you kidding me? Jesus has everything. The whole universe is his. What are you offering him these fallen kingdoms for, as if they have any value at all, as if they're even yours to give in the first place? I mean, after all, he is the temporary ruler of this present darkness. But here Daniel, after all this time with God, is seeing through the noise of it all. None of this has appeal to him at all. To be the third ruler of a kingdom that's about ready to collapse. Yeah. He sees, technically, he has read and he knows the writing on the wall. So Daniel doesn't give any pleasantries here. He doesn't have time for this. He doesn't say anything like, long live the king. No, He just says as he does. He just doesn't want any of the stuff. But he will give him the message, because after all, that's what God wants him to do. He needs to hear from God. This being the king, he needs to hear from the true God of heaven and earth. So Daniel only cares about serving God. He had no interest in the gifts, no interest in the rewards. He couldn't be bought. That's his integrity. That's what we've seen since day one as we've started reading these first 5 chapters of Daniel. And you would be hard pressed to try to find a man like that in any form of politics of any society today. I mean, we use the frame of reference of what's going on in the United States. I'm talking about any politics, anywhere, of any nation on earth. You're going to be hard pressed to find a man like Daniel. So Daniel says he will make known to the king the interpretation, but he has a few things to say first. And this is my kind of guy. I mean, like any good preachers, he can't give his message until he gets through the introduction. So, Dr. Ford, what comes next here? Verses 18 to 21.
It says, O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor. And because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses.
Wow. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar had used the authority and position that was given to him by God for his own prideful purposes. So what happened? Well, God struck him down until he learned the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men. Now, with that declaration, the message gets personal, and this king needed to hear it. He says here in verse 22, but you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. Wow. So it's indictment time. The first indictment we see here is Belshazzar knowingly sinned, right? So he knew the history. He sees the evidences. He knew better. He knew what God had done in their kingdom, knew what he was doing ultimately in his pride, and he chose to turn from the truth. He was about 10 years old when Nebuchadnezzar submitted himself under Yah. That's Yahweh. And he would have heard and even seen the king declare the reign of the true God for 3 to 4 more years into his early teens. So therefore, his sin was a flagrant rebellion against the knowledge that he had.
You know, it really reminds me of the good kings of Judah and then their progeny. You have these great kings, Josiah, what have you, Hezekiah.
Yeah, sure.
And then their kids stray away. Yet they saw all these things. They saw the blessings. They saw the communication. They saw all these wondrous things. And then it gets to be their turn to rule. It's like, meh, I'm going to go. I got to go this way and, try this other thing.
And we see that with King Hezekiah and even King Asa, who saw the blessings of God unfold in their kingdom real time.
Just amazing. Yeah.
And Asa, of course, we have great example with him that he trusted God with the affairs of the kingdom, but with his own health, he turned to the doctors instead. He didn't trust God. It's like, wait a minute, what do I have to do to show you, to prove myself true?
Right.
The God of heaven and earth, that I have done all of this for you, but you can't even trust me with your own body.
Yeah. I feel like I could be guilty of the same thing. Like, so I'm going to trust you with my salvation, but with this smaller thing over here, I'm not going to have faith. I'm not going to trust. I'm going to worry about that. But I'm going to,
we're a good company, aren't we? I mean, we see all these examples of the patriarchs and matriarchs of Scripture, and they are not impervious to sin.
Right.
They are not people we should actually even put on some kind of pedestal. Look how great they never failed. Rather, I mean, when you look to Hebrews chapter 11, praise be to God that it's all about their faith. But when we know their stories, we see how they failed time and time again. Yeah. And of course, that's what 1 Corinthians 1 tells us, that he uses the broken things, the foolish, the ignorant things. And through them, he brings himself glory. And I'm like, that's me.
Right, me too.
I'm the broken fool whom God chose to use to bring himself glory. In fact, anything that may be perceived as good that comes out of my lips is from him anyway. So he gets all the credit and glory. But we have to learn from these things. And that's what Scripture tells us, that all that was written of old was for our learning. So we can see, how did they behave? And here, the children of Nebuchadnezzar and how dysfunctional the family became. And I want to tell you, when I say the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, that's exactly what this is, because they lost their territories. The Persians are upon them. They've lost everything. What's left is that basically they've entrenched themselves into what's left of a city, and now they're about to fall. And Daniel knows this, and he's seen this. And the family is without excuse. They had seen God restore Nebuchadnezzar and him give glory and praise to God. And yet here, the next generation is refusing to acknowledge the same God whom their father had acknowledged and had to be brought low to acknowledge that. In verse 23, it says, "And you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know, and the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways you have not glorified." And of course, we see where the Apostle Paul later will say that our works can be likened to that, of wood, hay, and stubble that are easily burned up. And how all of these things, they were worshiping all of the foolishness of it all. It's like those who worship, like New York City, for example, a city of iron and steel and concrete, as if it's impervious. And yet one giant wave could take it all out.
Sure.
I mean, we've talked about that in the geomagnetic pole shift. The scriptures tell us in Revelation chapter 6 that every island is going to be impacted. Every mountain is going to be impacted. All of this is going to fall before the Lord Jesus Christ. And if we are laying any claim to somehow thinking we're impervious, we've got another thing coming. Yeah. And what it does is keep us mindful of where are we laying up treasures. And here Daniel is quite bold with this king. You have worshiped all this nonsense. You think yourself so powerful. Even today, we worship military might.
Right.
And it's so dependent even on technology. What if that technology fails? I mean, even George Washington recognized that the bullets that missed him were by the divine hand of providence. Where has that kind of attitude gone? Yeah. In fact, I'm reminded how George Washington didn't even want the men using foul language because he didn't want God's hand against them. He was so aware of the presence of God to give them victory. And here this arrogant king before Daniel thinks himself impervious to the true God of heaven and earth, who just with a spoken word, everything is taken away from him. So the second indictment against him is that he deliberately blasphemed God. Deliberately. You should see the things that are said online after some of the sermons that I give. It is unbelievable how the venom just comes out of people. It's like a rage toward God, you say anything truthful, it will incite them to say things they would never say to anybody else. And that's what happens when the sin of man is contrasted with the glory of God. Rather than humble oneself before his holiness, it's almost like the hatred brews out of them. And we see that with this foolish king. Third indictment is idolatry. He knew the truth and turned from it. He blasphemed God and then turns to false idols instead. That's the progression we see in culture. And we see that in verses 24 to 25. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and his writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written. Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And that's Daniel chapter 5, 24 to 25. So these words are Aramaic and should have been understood, but they were all blinded to their meaning except Daniel. So some of their confusion is because there isn't a sentence here. It's almost like a mathematical solution. Sin equals consequence. So hence why it needs an interpretation. Numbered, weighed, divided. That's what that means. So here's what it says here, verses 26 to 28. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Ouch. And then we get the next word, Tekel. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Upharsin, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Okay, so Mene, your number's up. Your number's up. You are done. You are finished. Can you imagine the boss bringing you into the room and telling you that? Your number's up. You're done. You're finished. Tekel, you have fallen short of the standard. You look the part, but all you did was bring in a bunch of immorality. The word means to be weighed and found too light. So when they weighed things, they would put whatever the standard of weight was on one side of the scale, and on the other, whatever the commodity was, it had to balance. Well, here, when you put the weight and standard of God's holy measures and you put the king on the other side of that scale, it's not even close. Upharsin, also Perez. And this is actually a plural concept, and you have the same root consonants in the middle. So in the same root word, just two different forms of it, the root word simply means to divide. And so this is the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. This is the end of Belshazzar. So listen, Jesus wrote on the ground, and all the men scattered in John chapter 8, verses 6 to 8. Here, God writes on the wall, and a nation falls. So, which, by the way, when Jesus wrote on the ground, some believe that it was, writing the names and the sins of all the accusers. And as a result of what was written, we see in Jeremiah 17:13, even, those who depart from me shall be written in the earth because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. So rather than their names written in the Lamb's book of life, their names are written on the earth. Very interesting. So while Daniel is saying these words to the king, there's a lot going outside. I mean, a lot of things happening. They're completely unaware of all these things that are happening. Herodotus, the historian, he recorded that the Medes and the Persians were outside the city on the 16th day that we find in Tishrei of 539 BC. And that night, the Medes and the Persians built a dam on the Euphrates River, and it flowed under so this whole water, if you can imagine, flowed under the wall of the city. They diverted all that water that was coming from the Euphrates, except a little small, shallow portion. They diverted it into a swampland. And when the water began to fall in the midst of the banquet, so while all of this is happening, it came down to about the knee height or waist height of the soldiers. And then they marched underneath the wall on that shallow riverbed, went right on inside and killed all the guards, threw open the gates, and the whole Medo-Persian Empire, the army of them, descended right into the city in one fell swoop. It's all over. And so we'll come back to verse 29 next week, Dr. Ford. We'll pick up right there, and hopefully we'll make our way into chapter 6 next week. Hopefully there won't be yet another disturbance in the world like Venezuela and all these things we're keeping our eyes on right now, and seeing how these things also may play out in some prophetic sense. So we want to thank you all for listening to Engage in Truth each and every week. Thank you for being faithful listeners. And we encourage you to go back and share this with your friends and family alike. You can find it at calvaryfountain.com. calvaryfellowship.com. This is a ministry of Calvary Fellowship, Fountain Valley Church, and services are 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. on Sundays, and we'd love to see you there. God bless you, my friends. Take care.